No? Oh, we're in English, okay. So we'll say Shabbat over the English accent now. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out to learn Torah and to say how impressive it is to dedicate a whole weekend like this, Thursday night and Shabbat and Motzei Shabbat to learning Torah. And I take no responsibility for the choice of the Shurim. There are a lot of options, and the people responsible for bringing me made the choices. But actually, as you'll see at the end, maybe when I wrap up a little bit, we'll see a little bit of a thread running through some of what I've spoken about in many of the shiurim that I've given this weekend. We're going to talk about Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. Known, I don't know how people perceive King Solomon, but we're going to try today to draw a portrait of the man, to try and understand a little bit what he was about. We know King Solomon from several different places. From this book of Melachim, I think most people gain an impression of Shlomo more from his Megillot, which we're familiar with. We're familiar with Shir HaShirim, and we're familiar with Kohelet, and some people also know Mishlei, right? Mishlei, which has all sort of wisdom. And already Chazal, the rabbis, when they were discussing, first of all, I will say that some of these books, like Shir HaShirim and like Kohelet, were so controversial that Chazal didn't know whether to canonize them in the Tanakh. The Mishnah in Masechet Yadayim says they were discussing whether Shir HaShirim belongs in the Tanakh because of its very, very explicit sexuality, until Rabbi Akiva stood up and said, it's okay, it's kosher. In fact, it's more than kosher. It's Shir HaShirim is Kodesh Kodashim, it's the holiest of the holy. Mahadrim. And we have questions about Kohelet, where there were statements in the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, which seem to disagree with one another, self-contradictory. But once again, it was pushed through. This shows to me that, on the one hand, there's something about Shlomo HaMelech which is a little bit, how should I say, on the edge. It's a little bit controversial. There's something, if all his literary works have question marks over them, what's this telling us about Shlomo HaMelech? On the other hand, there's a very interesting statement about when he wrote all of these different books. Some of the opinions say that they wrote all the books, all of these books, Shir HaShirim, Mishlei, and Kohelet, at the end of his life. But the other opinion in the Midrash says, no, Shir HaShirim, which has the youth of spring, which has a falling in love, and this relationship was written in his youth. Mishlei was written in his midlife, when he had gained wisdom. And Kohelet, if you know Kohelet, he raises all sorts of things, and then he says, Hakol Hevel Ruach. This is all nonsense, this is all stupidity, this is all foolishness. He sounds a little bit cranky, a little grumpy. And they say, no, Kohelet was written in his old age. In fact, it's interesting to say that because the test case for everything in Kohelet is what will happen after you die. Right? If you have a lot of wealth, what will happen after you die? If you have a lot of wisdom, what will happen after you die? If you experience pleasure, what will happen? Will anything remain? This is his old age. If that's true, then what the rabbis are pointing to is a journey that Shlomo HaMelech undertook throughout his life. He wasn't a constant figure, he went through a journey on his life. And I would like tonight to take you through that journey and to explain a little bit about the story of Shlomo, who he was, and we're going to focus on Sefer Melachim. In fact, I've produced a ridiculously long source sheet here, I apologize. We're going to try and read through it all, 7 pages, I'm not sure we'll manage. But we will, what I would like to do is tell the story of Shlomo HaMelech and try and understand what his vision was, but also where he came undone, where he failed in some way. If we can talk about that, but I think we can talk about that, and try and understand what really was driving him. I've tried to here explain the structure of the chapters in the book of Melachim by use of a chart. And if you look here, if we read from left to right, Chapter 3 to 5 of Sefer Malachim describes the rise of Shlomo. Chapter 3, if you're looking at the bottom, the gift of wisdom, his government and tax districts, and the empire he creates. The middle prakim, the middle chapters, describe the jewel in the crown, his major crowning achievement, the Binyan Beit HaMikdash, the temple. In general, by the way, the book of Kings, Sefer Malachim, begins with the building of the temple and ends with the destruction of the temple. So it's a book which is very concerned with the temple's beginnings all the way till the end. So we're going to talk about the temple and, of course, what is Shlomo's role in the temple. However, the way I've described it, and really actually if when you read through the chapters you don't quite realize it until you get to chapter 11, but chapter 9 to 11 describes the fall of Shlomo HaMelech. If you want the real catchphrases which depict this, the fall, the rise and the fall, you can look at the bubbles that I've pushed out. That on the chapter 3 in the beginning it says, "Vayahav Shlomo et Hashem lalechet b'chukot David aviv." Shlomo loved Hashem, following all the paths of David, his father. At the end of his life, at the beginning of chapter 11, his love isn't to Hashem, it's to these foreign women. And later on it talks about how in his old age they led his heart astray. A person who starts off with an exceptional love of God and ends off with other loves which lead him on a negative path. So we definitely have a story here, and I want to try and get to a little bit to try and describe what Shlomo was all about, how he built up his empire, how he built up his vision, and what he was trying to achieve. In order to do this, we have to read through the Psukim themselves, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to follow the story as if we're reading through a Tanakh. We're going to start where it says section 2, Solomon's Empire, chapter 1 Kings, chapter 5. We'll ignore the first 3 Psukim, we'll come back to them right at the end. And try and read what the Tanakh has to tell us about Shlomo's achievements. Okay? We're ready to go? Let's set sail. And Shlomo ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines. The river probably being the Euphrates, all the way to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. They brought presents that served Shlomo all the days of his life. But he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, from Titzaf to Azza, over all the kings on this side of the river, and he had peace on the sides around him. And Yehudah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine, under his fig tree. I've got to read this pasuk in Hebrew, sorry. Vayeshev Yehudah v'Yisrael lavetach ish tachat gafno v'tachat te'inato. These are very classic phrases, right? Midan v'ad Beersheva kol yemei Shlomo. In these 3 short psukim, we get a description of the geopolitical situation in Shlomo's time, that Shlomo inherits a kingdom which is enormous. The land of Israel is a small area, sort of the size of Israel today, but there can be a greater Israel, so to speak, which stretches up to Egypt and all the way up to Mesopotamia. Depending on how strong Israel is, it can be more smaller or it can have larger borders. King David, Shlomo's father, had expanded the borders of the kingdom very wide. There were Jews living in these areas around, all the way up, but they had military control, they had political control. Probably what was true about this period as well was Mesopotamia was a little weaker, Egypt was a little weaker, and we all know there is no vacuum in the Middle East, right? And wherever there was weakness, David pushed out the borders so there was maximal effect, and he filled up that whole space between Mesopotamia and the land of Egypt. But what we're told here is he had this tremendous control, and Yehudah and Israel, at this time they are a united kingdom, are living peacefully. That image of living under the vine and under the fig tree, right? Because these are the trees which give, one thing you need in the Middle East is you need shade. And those are trees, they don't say under your olive tree. It's not comfortable to sit under an olive tree. Olive tree is little and whatever. But a fig tree is a huge tree, which is very green, certainly in the summer. and you can sit, if you trail a vine, you can sit under the vine in the shade, and that's the metaphor which is used. We have national unity, Israel and Yehuda, and we have peace and comfort, right? I will say even more than that, the verse, which just before that section, but there's a limit to how many verses I could bring, talks about the idea, Yudav Yisrael Rabim Kachol Asher Alayam Larov Ochlim V'Shotim Usmechim. The Jewish people at this time are numerous, and they are Ochlim V'Shotim Usmechim, eating and drinking and happy. Okay? The living is easy. Okay? If you want to put it in that phrase, standard of living is high, and things are good. Okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about what he had in terms of his military. And some of you who have been on tours of Israel will have witnessed these things. Shlomo had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, 12,000 horsemen, and those officers provided support for King Shlomo, and all that came to King Shlomo's table, every man in his month, they let nothing be lacking. Gatekeepers and straw for the horses and swift steeds brought they into the place where it should be, every man according to his charge. In other words, okay, we're talking about the fact that Shlomo had tax districts and they supported the central government, but we're talking about Shlomo having 40,000 stables for his chariots, 40,000 horses, and 12,000 horsemen. This is quite something. A standing army of this sort. This is usually, until this point, the Israelite army relied on miluim, right? Reserves. When King Saul was a king, he had 3,000 standing army. Now this is just the cavalry, right? 40,000 horses. Think about how many to build those stables. Think about what you need in order to sustain them, to make horseshoes, to feed them. We're dealing with a huge infrastructure in Shlomo's time, and just these statistics give us a sense of the size of his kingdom. We know, and it mentions later on in the Pirkei Shlomo, he had 3 chariot cities. All of these have been excavated and found to be similar in size and similar in their gatehouses. Chatzor in the north, I don't know if anybody's visited the excavations, Megiddo in the Jezreel Valley, and Gezer, right? Gezer in the south. And if you visit all those 3 places, each of them have the same triple gate, 3-chambered gate, which dates to around the time of Shlomo. Actually now, they just recently, 3 years ago, Eilat Mazar found in Jerusalem a 2-chambered gate, which also matches the architecture. So we're pretty sure that Shlomo, the one in Chatzor was what we would call, they're all at the entrance to valleys. The one in Chatzor is what we'd call the Pikud HaTzafon, the northern command. The one in Megiddo, the central command. The one in Gezer, the southern command. And what we're saying is that Shlomo is also investing in making sure his country is well protected. He has this army. If you want to be an empire, you need to make sure that you also have a deterrent factor and that nobody's thinking of starting up with you. And it's interesting that we never see Shlomo go to war. He doesn't seem to need to go to war. He seems to be so mighty that he fends off any attacks. In fact, as we know from Divrei Hayamim, they talk about his name being Shlomo because Shalom v'sheket etein biyamav. He will have peace and quiet in his days. So this army is more an army which is there to deter any potential attackers. He actually doesn't need to go to war, and we have no record of him going to war at any point in his 40-year kingdom, which is quite a long reign, especially if you read through Tanakh and you know how many ups and downs happen in 40 years, this is quite an achievement. What else? Let's take a look about the thing which Shlomo's famous for, his wisdom. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about this wisdom. And God gave Shlomo wisdom and understanding exceeding much. That's good English, but anyway. Sorry, I took this translation from somewhere. I take no responsibility for the translation. And largest of heart, even as sand that's on the seashore. So we have this chokhmah and tvuna. And Shlomo's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than all men, wiser than Eitan HaEzrachi, and Heman v'Chalkol v'Dardar. We don't know who these people are, but it's like, he was wiser than Plato and Aristotle. He was wiser than, I don't know, whoever you want to come up with. whatever names you can think of, Einstein and Milton, whoever it might be, he was wiser than them all. Now, let's just keep reading. He had 3,000 proverbs. His songs, his poems were 1,005. And he spoke of trees from the cedar that's in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke of beasts and fowl and creeping things and fishes. And all the people to hear the wisdom of Shlomo from kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. I want to talk a little bit about this. First of all, Shlomo's wisdom, what is it? You know, I remember a Midrash that I heard when I was a child, which spoke about how, when it says that he spoke about the he could actually speak to the animals. Right? He's Dr. Doolittle or something like that. Now, I don't want to go in that direction. I want to say what we're really being told here is that he was a master in every sphere of knowledge. Here we talk about proverbs, which I guess we'll call that philosophy or life wisdom. Then there is literature, his Schiur, his literature. Then we talk about the plants, so we're talking about him as being a master of botany and zoology and all. And everybody comes around to hear his knowledge. Now you sort of do wonder how he could have done this. You know, let's say people come to hear his knowledge. How many hours can he lecture? He's got a lecture in the biology department, right? In the plants department, in the literature department, and in the philosophy department, and run a country. When does he have time? When exactly did he prepare all the lectures, and when did he give them? And the truth is, I imagine when they say that Shlomo had all this wisdom, I don't know if he personally had all, I think he was very wise, but did he really have all this wisdom? It's interesting. Later on, I'll just mention two other stories, which we're not going to read. One example will be the fact of the way he uses the people in the Lebanon. You know, you can just glance down. 1 second. Okay, so he says, yes, look at verse 20, just below, on page 2. He wanted to get wood from Lebanon, and he says, V'atatzaveli, therefore command that the Lebanese hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon, and my servants shall be with your servants, and I'll pay you for your servants, for know there is no one who has the skill to cut down timber like the people from Sidon. Shlomo doesn't know how to work with wood, so what does he do? He says, let's go up to Sidon, and you will teach me how to do it, and then I'll get your knowledge. Right? In another case, he doesn't know how to work with metal, and he imports somebody who is actually half Jewish and half not Jewish, and he says, come and mine the metal for me. And we've actually found Shlomo's copper mines in the Negev. In fact, it's actually amazing what they found in the copper mines. They found what these servants ate and what fabrics they wore and all sorts of things. Right? But he brings somebody, he imports somebody in order to teach them how to work with copper, and then they work with copper. When he wants to know how to run a navy, he appeals to the Lebanese, the Sidonim, and says, let my servants go with your servants on an expedition to Africa, etc., etc. What I think Shlomo is doing very simply is, as much knowledge as he can import into Jerusalem, he can. He makes Jerusalem, in the same way as you say Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash, you can also say Shlomo spoke about proverbs and literature and this and that and the other. I don't know if he personally had all this knowledge, maybe he did. But maybe he taught other people, or maybe he shared knowledge, but what I can say is, he wanted Jerusalem in his time to be the, the Princeton and Harvard, the Oxford and Cambridge, the Technion and Hebrew University, right? All in Yerushalayim, so that anybody in the Middle East will come and know the place to gain any knowledge you want, whether it's about plant life or animal life, whether it's about literature or philosophy, about religion, or whatever it might be, come to Jerusalem. And indeed, it says here, Vayavo mikol ha'amim lishma et chochmat Shlomo, kol malchei ha'aretz yishma'u et chochmato, and we're going to see an example of this in a few minutes. You gain the impression as you read through this chapter that Shlomo is really building something impressive. Okay? He's really building something impressive. And if you reread, I'll just read a few more psukim here in this chapter 5 to gain the impression. next segment in verse 15. You're with me on page 2, verse 15. And Hiram, king of Tyre, Tsar, these are the Phoenicians, a very cosmopolitan kingdom, a very wealthy kingdom on the Lebanese coast. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants unto Shlomo. For he has heard they anointed him king in place of his father. And Hiram had loved David. And Shlomo said to Hiram, saying, you know that David my father could not build a house for the name of Hashem, his God, because of the wars were on him every side, until Hashem put them under the soles of my feet. But now my Lord God has given me rest on every side. There is no adversary nor evil occurrence. Ein satan ve'ein pegara. Ve'ani omer livnot bayit l'shem Hashem Elohai ka'asher tiveh Hashem. Fascinating. I want to say two things about this. Number one, we see international recognition. One of his neighbors comes to him in peace and says, I love your father, I love you too, how can I help you? Shlomo's first thing says to him, the first thing I want to do is, the one thing that my father didn't manage to achieve, I want to achieve. I want to build a Bet Mikdash. Shlomo sounds very impressive in terms of his spiritual aspirations. And what he needs is, of course, he needs the wood. Okay? And it's amazing how now he manages to import the wood from Lebanon. Okay? We just read this pasuk, and I'll read it again. Now command that you hew me cedar trees out of the Lebanon, and my servants shall be with your servants, and I will pay for your servants. You know there is none among us who has the skill to hew timber like the Sidonians. Right? It's interesting, apparently, cedar wood, so I'm told by the experts, grows in its best way above 1,000 meters. The Golan is about 1,000 meters. It grows even better above 1,500 meters. And that's why we talk about the cedars of Lebanon. I think a cedar is on the flag of Lebanon. So the Lebanese cedars are much superior to, why particularly cedar wood? They actually talk about cedars and broshim, cypress trees. And the thing about all of them is they have a very, very long, straight bark, which can create wood paneling and wood supports, rather than something like one of the trees in Eretz Israel, like the fig tree, or like the shikma, or whatever it might be, which has, these can be used for wood paneling, to make wooden beams and supports for a large building. That's why he wants them. And indeed, when he hears this, look at Pasuk Chaf Aleph, verse 21. Hiram heard the words of Shlomo and rejoiced greatly, and said, blessed be the Lord this day, who has given David a wise son over this great people. Notice they mention his wisdom. And Hiram said to Shlomo, my servants will bring them down from Lebanon unto the sea, and you'll make them into rafts to go to the sea, unto the place that you appoint me, and cause them to be broken up there, and then receive them, and shall accomplish my desire in giving food for my household. In other words, how are we going to get them down to the land of Israel? Amazing. They float them down the Mediterranean Sea, from the ports of Lebanon, float them down to, I don't know, Yafo, or somewhere like that, and then they bring them up to Yerushalayim. Now how does Shlomo pay for all this wood? So it tells us something else, and it says, Hiram gave Shlomo timber of cedar and timber of cypress according to his desire, and Shlomo gave Hiram 20,000 measures of wheat for food to his household, and 20 measures of beaten oil. Thus Shlomo gave to Hiram year by year. How do you pay for it? We imported wood, and we exported grain and oil. Now, first of all, there's one thing I want to say here. I didn't read the Hebrew, but you've got to read this word. Shlomo natan leChiram 20,000 kor chitim, makolet lebeito. Right? You visited the makolet in Israel? Here's the word, right? You've got to hear that, right? Makolet means the basic stuff he needed. Everybody needs oil, everybody needs wheat. That's the makolet, right? But for our purposes, it's very interesting that if he can export so much wheat and so much oil, there is a grain surplus. There is an oil surplus. The country is booming. You know, it reminds us of the psukim which tell us that if we follow b'chukotai telechu, ve'mishvotai tishmaru, v'asitem otam, right, that you'll get all your rain in its right time, right? And it says, v'isig, what did he say? Thank you. V'isig lachem dai she'patziru v'asir yasig et zera v'achaltem lachmechem lasova. Your grain harvest will continue into the batzir, the wine harvest into the grain harvest, and you'll be the country is booming. Maybe this is a reflection that the country is following the Torah. So we have great international relations. The first request that Shlomo makes of a foreign superpower is to help him build the Beit HaMikdash, and he can pay with surplus grain and surplus oil. The country's doing great. Okay? All of this, by the way, when we get to the fall, we're going to see the flip factors of these. But first I'm trying to sort of give you an image of what Shlomo is trying to achieve. And in the last scene in chapter 5, and then we'll move into chapter 6, what do we see here? We see the way that Shlomo actually gets people working on this project. Shlomo raised a levy out of all of Israel, a mas, a tax. What's the tax? It's a people tax. And the levy was 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month, by courses a month. They were in Lebanon, and 2 months at home. So he had something like 30,000 people working for him, but each went up for a month to Lebanon and 2 months at home. He didn't want to deplete the home front, but these people, I don't know how they were chosen. And Solomon had 70,000 porters, right? It says it's Shlomo elef nosei sabal, schleppers in our language, okay? And 80,000 people hewing stone. Okay, 80,000 people hewing stone and 70,000 schleppers. Think about how much Shlomo is building when he needs these sorts of numbers of people. Digging in the stone. We're dealing with a person who does things besides Shlomo's chief officers that will work 3,300 who rule over the people that rule in the world. So we've got 3,300 white-collar people and 150,000 blue-collar workers who are hewing and who are schlepping. Shlomo's doing a lot of stuff. We've got the wood, we've got the... And of course, where's this all going to lead to? The next pasuk, the next chapter, and on top of page 3, I put the kruvim, but this is literally the next pasuk. And in the 480th year after the Israelites left the land of Egypt, in the month of Ziv, that is the second month, in the 4th year of his reign over Israel, Shlomo built the house to God. I just want to say something about this number. This number is like an unbelievable number. 480 years since Yetziat Mitzrayim, 12 times 40. Do we get a more perfect number, right, in the Tanakh? 400, it's too good to be true, this number, and I want to say a little bit about what this number expresses. But you have a question.
Do you think people like Shlomo?
Do I think they liked him at this point?
This heavy tax. Who likes tax?
Who likes taxes? I don't know. Well, maybe he gave them 2 months off. That's not so bad. It did say at the beginning that the people were ochlim smechim, right? So ochlim v'shotim smechim. So maybe if the general, it certainly seems at this point the economy is good. There's peace. International relations are good. I'm not sure who these workers were. Maybe they were poor people anyway who were looking for a job. I really have no clue. At this stage, my sense is people do like Shlomo. At the end of his reign, as you probably know, that might be what you're pointing to, his son, after 40 years, becomes king, and what do the people ask? The first thing they ask is, lower the taxes, right? But we're going to explain that I think that's a later development. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. Yes?
But I didn't yet understand. It was a tax on each one, and with this money they paid this 150,000 people, or were there 150,000 people designated as military service?
It sounds to me that, yes, you went to each, like Shevet or something like that, you went to each tribe, and you said, you're obligated to provide this number of people. Maybe there are people who owed the government money anyway, or something like that. I have no clue.
And these men were paid, or were...
Either they were paying off debts, or maybe they were paid. I don't know. Well, taxes people pay, so maybe... I don't know quite how it worked. I don't know.
But he made them slaves, like working in the north, bringing all the stones into Israel. I mean, it was tough work for people, probably not...
For sure. The question obviously is also how much people identified with the national effort of building the Beit HaMikdash. If they identified with it, then they might be happy, might be proud. Right? They'll go to the kotel and they'll say, you see that stone there? That was me! Right? I did that one! Right? I don't know. I don't know how it worked. Okay. I want to say something a little bit further about this, because all this is leading. I guess what I've said so far is this. Shlomo, when you read through the book of Shoftim, and even the book of Shaul, you can barely talk about Israel having, even secure borders in their country. Throughout the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, Israel's always being invaded. Shaul HaMelech starts off his kingdom under occupation of the Philistines. And his first war in the book of Shmuel, chapter 13, is a war of independence, where he manages at least to get the Philistines out of the hill country around Jerusalem and what have you. And all the way through his kingdom, he is fighting the Philistines. And in fact, of course, Shaul is killed in battle with the Philistines. It's David who really manages to get the nation on its feet and give it wide borders and a sense of security. But I would argue that Shlomo takes it up to an even higher level, where Shlomo is the first person who maybe could be called a sort of emperor, and he's making an empire which is very, very impressive. And I want to talk for a few minutes now about what I think his vision was of where he wanted to take this, and maybe say that in a spiritual direction where he was going. As being a spiritual man, what did we read in the opening verse? And Shlomo loved God, right? The first thing he asked from Hiram, help me build the Bet Mikdash. What does he want to achieve? And how does he view what he has achieved? So one of the very interesting things that happens here is he's building the Bet Mikdash, and the Bet Mikdash is built 480 years after Tziat Mitzrayim. It's 40 times 12, like the 12 tribes, 40 years. It sounds like a perfect number, and I think Shlomo did see it as a perfect number. And I'm going to make an argument, which I'll try and substantiate a little bit, that Shlomo feels that he's almost in a new period of Jewish history. In a new period of Jewish history. I'm going to illustrate this with a couple of different things, but let me give you a couple of things to look at before. First thing, in the verse we just read at the top of page 3, you'll notice a very strange name of a month. It says, 480 years after Israelites left the land of Egypt, in the month of Ziv, that is the second month. What is that? Month of Ziv. I'll come back to it in a second. Shlomo's, these are the only chapters where we find months like this, the month of Ziv. I'll talk about it in a minute. But let's look at some very interesting things that he puts into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple, which we've never seen before. Let me explain what I mean. Let's keep reading in source number 2 here on page 3. The inner sanctuary he made, that's the Kodesh Kodashim, the inner sanctuary, he made kruvim out of olive wood. Now the kruvim in the temple, kruvim on the Aron, Habrit, are made out of gold. And he makes them out of olive wood. Each one is 10 cubits high. That's 15 foot high. Okay? Just to understand. Now, and it says here, 5 cubits was the length of each one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the length of the other wing. The Kodesh Kodashim was a 20 by 20 cube. 20 high, 20 wide. What we're saying is, in the Kodesh Kodashim were 2 kruvim standing on the floor. They were made out, it couldn't be made out of solid gold, because think how big they were. And they each had wings expanded out, 5 and 5. And then there was another one next to them, 5 and 5. And underneath them was Moshe's Aron with its kruvim. But these massive kruvim made out of olive wood and covered with gold. What's he doing? What is this? Like taking these kruvim and bolting them to the floor, essentially, right? They stood on the floor, right? What's the idea behind these kruvim? It's an innovation that Shlomo makes in the Beit Mikdash. What is it? And I'd like to suggest the following. If you look at source number 4, here, we all know this pasuk. We say it when the Torah comes out. Vayihi binso Aaron, vayomer Moshe. When the Aaron traveled, what did Moshe say? Kuma Hashem, right? Get up, Hashem, right? Why? Because the Aron is called, right, the Yoshev HaKruvim. You actually see that in source number 5. Aron Elohim Hashem Nikra Shem Hashem Tzvaot Yoshev Kruvim Alav. The ark of the God of hosts, whose name rests the Lord of hosts, who dwells on the Kruvim. Literally, who? Yoshev, who sits on the Kruvim. The Aron is God's, it's what he sits on. And I'm sorry to be a little graphic here, right? But Vayihi binso Aaron, if the Aaron is what God sits on, when the Aaron moves, what do you say? You need to move the chair. Kuma Hashem. Get up, the chair's moving, right? Uvenucho yomar, and when it rests, you say, Shuva Hashem revot alfei Yisrael. Now you can sit down again, God, right? Sorry, I'm sorry I'm being so graphic. I don't really think that it's like that, but that's what the Psukim seem to say. You understand what I'm saying? I'll put it I'll explain it this way. In the time of the Midbar, if God's presence is focused on the Aron, the Aron always moves. It has carrying rods, and it always moves. And the Aron is always moving from place to place to place to place. Okay? Now, we come to Jerusalem. What does Shlomo do? He takes the kruvim, I mean they're still on the Aron, but he makes kruvim and puts them on the floor. And I'll read source number 6. He says, Bano baniti beit zvulach machon l'shivtecha olamim. I built for you a stately house, a place where you may dwell forever. What's he saying? He's saying, we don't need to move anymore. Until this point in our history, we were an unstable nation. We were always invaded. We didn't really have a capital city. My father is the first one to make Jerusalem into a capital city. And now I've made ourselves into a wide empire. And now Jerusalem will be the place where you will dwell forever. Now I can, so metaphorically, he didn't, but take the Aron off their, take the Kruvim off their movable platform and put them on the floor. We're here to stay. This is a stage of permanence. 12 times 40 years. 40 years is wandering, right? 12 times 40 years. We've wandered 12 times 40. Now we can rest. And you know what else he does? He changes the names of the month. We actually hear about 3 different names of months that he actually makes, which are different. But why would you change the months? Because we say, it's Rosh Chodesh today. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. Why? There are no names for months in the Torah, correct? It's the first month, the second month, the third month. You know, it took me a long time when I first came to Israel to remember what is Yom Rishon, what is Yom Sheni. I'm used to saying Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But what's the idea of not having names for there's only one day in the week which has a name. Shabbat, because you're always counting up to Shabbat, or counting down. Hayom Yom Rishon, le Shabbat. Hayom Yom Sheni. When the first month is called the first month, it's the first month since Yetziat Mitzrayim. The second month since Yetziat Mitzrayim. The third since Yetziat Mitzrayim. If Shlomo gives new names to the months, then what's he saying? Yetziat Mitzrayim is not our major beginning point. There was a period of formation of the nation, but now we're at the period of nationhood, statehood. We've got a new beginning. And what's that new beginning? Building the Bet Mikdash. The Bet Mikdash shows we've come to a rest. God isn't in a tent anymore. He is now in a house. The Jewish people is in a house. We've entered into a new period of history. It's quite ambitious, I would say, Shlomo's vision, to see himself as an emperor at peace, and that God is at peace, and we now have stability. This is a place where you can rest forever. But I want to say even something further in this vision. Shlomo, when he builds the Bet HaMikdash, does not think that God really lives in the Bet HaMikdash, like I was saying before with the chair. I'll even read to you a verse that he says, if you look at section 4, on the bottom of page 3, this is Shlomo's prayer when he opens the Bet HaMikdash, and he says the following, he says, Ki omnam yeshev Elohim al haaretz, can God indwell on earth? Ki hashamayim u'shmayim lo yechal b'nichal. The heavens and the heavens and the heavens cannot contain you. How much less this house that I built. But turn to the prayer of your servants and to his supplication, O Lord, my God, to listen to the song and prayer, El Harinah ve'el Hatfilah, we say in our Slichot, which your servant prays before you this day, that your eyes be open to this house night and day, the place of which you said, my name shall be there, to listen to the prayer which your servant shall pray towards this place. In other words, what do I want this to be? A Beit Tfilah. Really actually more than a Beit Tfilah. We'll do the Tfilah, you do the Shmi'ah, right? We'll pray, you listen. This should be a place where your eyes and your ears are open, you will hear prayers through this place. And in fact, in that prayer you can see this is verse 29, and the next verse I'm quoting is verse 41. Between 29 and 41 he has a whole series of scenarios. He says, let's say there is a war. We'll cry to you to this house, and you'll listen and you'll save us. Let's say there is a plague. We'll pray to this house and you'll hear us. Right? Let's say there is a drought. You'll pray to this house and you'll hear us. The house of God is the Bet Mikdash is a house which is like, how should I say it? It's like the central post office, the central transmitter. All the prayers go there, and God hears it. Right? By the way, we still follow that today. All of our shuls around the world face Yerushalayim. The Gemara in Shabbat says that one of the names of Jerusalem is actually Talpiot. It says, what's Talpiot? Tel, the hill. Shekol Piot Ponim Elav, that all mouths turn towards. The idea being, and it says, if you live outside Israel, you face Israel. If you live in Israel, you face Jerusalem. If you live in Jerusalem, you face Harabayit. In Harabayit, you face Kodesh Kodashim. It's like all the prayers lead there, and there, God hears them. That's the connection point. But now, along with that, all of that is about the Jewish people. But then listen to this line. V'gam el hanochrim, but also the non-Jew, asher lo me'alcha Yisrael, who's not from your people Israel, who ba me'eretz v'choka l'man shemecha, top page 4. And he comes because of your name. Ki yishmonet shimcha gadol, they're going to hear your great name. Vet yadcha chazaka u'zorach netuya. They're going to hear how strong you are and how powerful you are. V'avit palel al habayit hazeh. Who will come? The Nochri. You should listen from the heavens and do whatever the non-Jew calls to you. So that all the nations will know your name. They will fear you, just like the people of Israel. Amazing. What he's saying is, I didn't make this Bet Mikdash just for the Jewish people. I made it for the whole world. And I'd say even more than that. Who did we see before? That because of Shlomo's wisdom, even the kings of other countries come. And now we understand why he wants the kings of other countries to come. Because he wants them to be convinced that there is a great God in Jerusalem. I always imagine, I'm sure that Shlomo's, all his officers and his policemen and his soldiers had a nice uniform. What was on the royal crest? What did he write? I sort of wonder whether maybe he wrote Yud Hey Vav Hey or something like that on it. He wanted everybody to know that Hashem is the God. He says it again at the end, and we actually quote this in our Tefillah on Sukkot. At the end of his whole prayer, he says, everything I've prayed before you should be krovim and Hashem Eloheinu, should be close to God. Do everything that I've asked and all Israel asked. But now he says, Leman dat kol amei haaretz, that all the people of the earth will know Ki Hashem hu ha'Elohim ein od. Almost as if he says, why have I built this whole empire? I built this whole empire so that there will be a Bet Mikdash in the center. And that's why I want this to be the Oxford and Cambridge, the whatever it might be. That's why I want us to be so powerful. That's why I want good relations. Everybody will come to Yerushalayim. All the nations will come to Yerushalayim. And what will they do then? They will know that you are Elokia, Ki Hashem hu Elohim ein od. Now maybe you might think I'm putting too many pieces of the puzzle together, right? But I want to give you a practical example where we see this really happening. And we'll understand a little bit about Shlomo's vision and how he achieved this. And that you will see in the story of the Queen of Sheba. Chapter 10 here, in section number 5, on page 4. You're all with me? The Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba, most archaeologists think, and most historians think that she was a queen somewhere in Saudi Arabia, or somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. We don't know but she was a very wealthy woman. Let's see what she said, what happens here. The Queen of Sheba, what?
Not in Africa.
Maybe some people think Africa. I don't know. That's what I heard. But the Queen of Sheba heard Shlomo's fame throughout the name of the Lord. Actually, here it says L'Shem Hashem, for the name of the Lord. Again, that's interesting. She hears Shlomo's reputation, L'Shem Hashem. People hear Shlomo and they say, Shlomo, that guy who believes in Hashem. It's a very interesting association, right? And she says, she came to test him with hard questions. Now, I don't know what these were, but many people imagine maybe she was going to test him with hard questions, but a lot of people think that it's not so different today when world leaders go and they have a summit, when people come to Washington, D.C., or to London, or wherever it might be, and what do they discuss? They discuss trade agreements, and mutual military agreements and what have you. If Shlomo is such a power in the region, and he controls all sorts of different markets. Later on they talk about how he controls the market for Arabian horses, right? But I'm sure he controls through his land and empire all sorts of trade routes and taxation levels and what have you. And she comes to test him with hard questions. Verse 2, she arrived in Jerusalem with a very large retinue, with camels bearing spices, a great quantity of gold and precious stones. Now that probably means she comes with boats up to Eilat, and has to come with all of this wealth, all the way from Eilat, I don't know, on camelback, with elephants, with carrot. Think how much she brings. She's a very wealthy lady herself, with huge means of her own transportation, because she makes her way to Jerusalem. But now look what happens when she comes. And when she came to Solomon, she asked him what she had in her mind. Solomon had answers for all her questions. There was nothing the king did not know, nothing to which he could not give her an answer. When the queen of Sheba observed all of Solomon's wisdom and the place he had built, the palace he had built, the fare of his table, ma'achal shulchano, what he had on his table, the seating of his courtiers, the service and attire of his attendants, the wine, and the burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, she was left breathless. Lo haya la od ruach. Shows you actually that Jerusalem must have been unbelievably impressive in Shlomo's time. The queen of these means could come to Jerusalem and just see something which it was just so mind-boggling. She'd never seen anything like it. One of the amazing buildings in Jerusalem is called the Beit Yar HaLevanon, the house of the Lebanese forest. And according to certain people who interpret the verses that way, it talks about having lots of pillars in this room, and it talks about having some sort of reflective mirrors on the outside, and on the top of the pillars were covered in cedar, and they had the tops of cedars on them. And the best explanation I ever found, this is a large building, even larger than the temple. The best explanation comes from somebody called Noga Haruveni, who set up Neok Dumim. I don't know if any of you visited Neok Dumim, and he suggested that what this actually was a hall of mirrors. He said, imagine a room which has rows and rows of imitation cedar trees. Pillars which are covered with wood, and then have tops of cedars on them, stuck onto the tops. And around the outside there are mirrors. If you walk into this room, you imagine you're in a forest, right? You're in a forest, right? Isn't that cool? He had these unbelievable buildings which he built in Yerushalayim, as well as his palace and the Beit Mikdash. Lo haya la od ruach. But now look how she responds. Verse 6, she said to the king, everything I heard in my own land about you and your wisdom was true, and I didn't believe the reports until I came and saw with my own eyes, and they didn't even tell me half. Your wisdom and wealth surpasses the reports I heard. But now look how she talks. How fortunate are your men. Ashrei anashecha. Ashrei avadecha eila. Happy, how fortunate are your courtiers who are always in attendance on you and hear wisdom. And here, Yehi Hashem Elokecha Baruch. Praise be the Lord your God who delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. It's because of the Lord's everlasting love for Israel that he made you king to administer justice and righteousness. Mishpat u'tzedakah. You remember that phrase, Mishpat u'tzedakah, from Abraham Avinu, who the derech Hashem was tzedakah u'mishpat. And I think about this woman, who's a woman not easily impressed. She comes to Jerusalem and she says, I always read this pasuk here and I say to myself, wait, I don't understand. Did she spend the week in Shlomo's palace, or did she spend the week in Eish HaTorah? Right? Where was she? Because look, she's saying, right? Yehi Shem Hashem Elokecha Baruch. Right? She's just been on a discovery seminar, right? She's suddenly talking about Hashem Elokim, and you're full of emet tzedakah, and God is so good to his people, right? It's unbelievable. And when I read this, I say to myself, Shlomo really created something which could wow, and then people are going to walk around Jerusalem and say, hey, wait, this monotheism thing, hey, think about it. It's got substance, it's got power. The most impressive kingdom in the Middle East at this time has it. Wow, maybe I could buy into that a little bit, right? You'll know that unless something has power and influence, it's not going to have influence. And it seems to me, this is Shlomo's plan. Why does Shlomo build this huge empire? Is it all for him? He seems to attribute it somehow to Hashem. His big aim is, as he said to Hiram, to build a bayit l'shem Hashem Elokai, Shem Hashem Elohei David, my father. And he wants the Bet Mikdash not only to be for the Jewish people, to be for all the people around who will hear all about you. So that means he's spreading, I don't know, maybe some of those stories he wrote were about how much God can do for everybody else. And he wants to publicize God, that people should come to Jerusalem, be impressed by Jerusalem, come to the temple, and adopt at least some of the assumptions of monotheism, of Judaism, amongst which we have things like mishpat and tzedakah. It's quite an impressive vision. And I think actually this is what Shlomo was promised when we talk about Shlomo's wisdom. Again, let's just read the gift of wisdom before we start getting depressed with the second part of the Schiur. Sorry about that. It's not going to be, there's not a good ending here. That's not a spoiler, it's just the way it goes, and why not so? But if you look at his beginnings are so impressive. If you look at section 6 on the bottom of page 4, he had this vision with God, and God said to him, what do you want? And he said, oh, now my Lord, oh God, you made me a servant king instead of my father. But I'm young, I'm a little child. In Hebrew, Anochim nar katon. Some people suggest, Rashi there says that he was only, we actually don't know how old he was when he came to the throne. Rashi somehow works out on the basis of Seder Olam, he was 12 when he came onto the throne. That's really young. He says, I'm so young. Even if he was 18, even if he was 23, with a king like David, how much experience did he have? And he says, I don't know how to go out or come in. I don't have experience. And he says, and your servant in the midst of all your people, which you've chosen, a great people who cannot be counted for a multitude, give your servant therefore an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this your great people? In other words, what do I want? I want a leiv shomea lahavin bein tov l'ra. And he then talks about kimi yuchad lishpot. He wants mishpat. And indeed, God said to him, because you've asked this thing, and you've not asked for yourself for a long life, and you didn't ask for riches, and you didn't ask for the life of your enemies, I've done according to what you say, and I've given you a wise and understanding heart, so there will be none like you before you. Nobody before you will be as wise, and nobody after. I've given you wisdom which is unbelievable. Again, what does he say to him? You didn't ask for wealth, you didn't ask for power, all you wanted wisdom, I will make you the wisest person. And again I stress, there was none before you, there was none after you like that. So I think this whole vision, as I wrote, the rise, the empire, the temple, describes a very lofty, a very noble concept of what Shlomo was trying to achieve. So now, yes?
I would like to come back to chapter 4 and to ask you, when we look at the prayer that from Schlomo, we see indeed his big wisdom, but then what about the two big kruvim? Should we say that the kruvim was made for the little people, and that his own vision was his prayer?
Well, my understanding
is what are finally the kruvim with regard to such a high-level prayer?
The way I understood the kruvim, and I've seen this in various commentaries, but people could have the kruvim are actually in the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest goes in there. It's not a place which is on exhibition. So the people, it's not there to impress the nation. I want to claim that it's to make a statement. It's to make a statement that God is not that the Shekhinah, put a better word, the Shekhinah is not movable. The Shekhinah is now fixed in place. And by the way, one of the interesting proofs for such a concept is that later on, when we read the book of Yecheskel has an image of the Ma'aseh Merkavah. He sees angels flying out of Jerusalem. And the sense is that the symbol of the angels flying out of Jerusalem is the sense that God is saying, the temple's being destroyed, I'm leaving town. I'm leaving. First he goes to the roof, and then he goes to the hill, and then he leaves the city completely. In other words, there is a sense that during the period that the temple was there, God's presence was somehow more manifest in Jerusalem. It was more present there. And I think that the kruvim, God is seen as Yoshet kruvim. It's one thing when you've got a box like the Aron which can be moved and carried, but when you put the kruvim and bolt them to the floor, you're saying, this is God's place forever. I think that was what he was trying to convey.
Understood. But from the one side, the prayer gives such a not. I mean, the kruvim are so anthropomorphic.
Okay. So, what you can do with that, I don't know. In other words, what it means that. What are we going to do with the fact that there are actually physical figures in the Holy of Holies? You can ask that also about Moshe's Aaron, Tzalel's Aaron.
Personal initiative.
Please God, next time we'll talk about that, okay? Yes?
Schlomo is certainly very impressive. His wealth, his wisdom, his achievements which he had. I would be interested in the community which was around Schlomo. How were the people? Did he do something for education for them? What about Shmirat Shabbat and Shmirat HaMitzvot? What happened around Shlomo HaMelech?
Right.
And you concentrate only on him. That was not the community.
Right.
A king in Judaism shouldn't be the exceptional person. He should be the primus inter pares, not more than that.
I agree with you. I wish I had this sort of information. One of the problems is that the books which talk about these figures don't give us much of a view of the nation. A lot of these books, like the Book of Kings, really focuses on the leadership rather than on the people. And we can gain certain insights, possibly from books like Kohelet and Mishlei, where he seems definitely to be writing wisdom for the average person, and not only wisdom for the people, but with any real information, we don't have. What we have is, the one glimpse we get of the people is at the end of the 40 years. And then the people are fed up with Shlomo entirely. And that's the process I'm going to describe in the next 20 minutes or so. So, but I wish I could, I wish I had that information. I just don't. If you ever find it, send me an email, okay? Okay. We all know that at the end of Shlomo's life, Shlomo, it says, he goes off track. How did that happen? Did it happen in a single day? Did it happen overnight? Did he have something swift, I don't know, religious crisis which sent him off track? And I think we can actually trace a lot of things going wrong in the second section. I put here that I divide it into three. Chapter 3 to 5, chapter 6 to 8, and chapter 9 to 11. And I will point out maybe just one thing which definitely, sometimes you can track what we call milim manchot, leading words which are repeated throughout the chapters. It's amazing that one word which comes up in chapter 9 to 11, over 17 times, is the word zahav, gold. That word, you'd expect it maybe to come up in an equal number of times in the earlier chapters. It doesn't come up not even once in chapter 3 to 5, not once. And it comes up once in the description of the temple, right? To describe, certain decorations of the temple. But more or less, the notion of gold doesn't feature until the last chapters. And we're going to see that this emphasis on wealth is going to become the dominating factor in the later chapters, but in a very particular way. And we're going to see a lot of the things we spoke about before, how should I say, turning sour, turning negative. Let me give you a few examples in this. I'm on the middle of page 5 where I put part 2, the fall. I want to start off with Hiram, the king of Lebanon. This is immediately after he's built the temple. By the way, it took him 20 years to build his house and the temple. 7 years to build the temple, and 13 years to build his own palace. And by the way, you can interpret that into one of two ways. 7 years to build the temple, and 13 years to build the palace, right? Some people say, of course the temple was nicer than his palace, right? But he was very eager to build the temple, so he built it quick, in 7 years. His palace, he couldn't be bothered so much, so, he kept on not quite dealing with it. Other people say, no, he built the temple 7 years, and then he sort of got into it, really, right? His palace, right now, he built it even nicer than the temple. That's an open question. But even that interesting question, that imbalance, what does that mean? It says this. Now, number one, Hiram. Hiram, the king of Tyre, had given Shlomo cedar trees and cypress trees, and gold, according to all his desire, all Shlomo's desire. And then Shlomo gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Hold on a second. Hang on. What's going on here? I don't understand. Okay? Before, he gave him wood, and he gave him grain and oil. Now, he's giving him what? Wood and gold. And how's he paying for it? He gives him 20 towns. Right? This is a little worrying, right? What do we call this? Land for trees, right? land. No, the thing is, it's not land for trees, it's land for golden trees, right? And it's even worse than this. And Hiram comes from Sor to see the cities which Shlomo had given him, and he didn't like them. And he says to Shlomo, what are these cities which you've given me, my brother, right? By the way, here you see, what does he say? I always thought it was like a new Israeli thing, that you call everybody Achi. But apparently it's a Lebanese thing, so don't worry. So he says, what are these things that you say, you've given me Achi? And he calls them Eretz Kavul until this day. Kavul means low-level land. I'm wondering to myself, why is Shlomo giving away cities? This is terrible. And I can point to two things. Number one, might it be that the country is not producing so much anymore? It was producing a lot of wine and oil. Now they don't have spare, wheat and oil. Now they don't have spare wheat and oil. Why? Because nobody's farming anymore. You know what happens, right? You know, you're a farmer, but you don't want your son to be a farmer. You want your son to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? If nobody's really farming, then the country's not producing wheat, and they're all working in high tech. They're not working in the fields anymore. Suddenly, the national product is not. I'll put it differently. I'll say it even worse than that. The country is living on a much higher standard of living, and they're importing more than they are producing. Right? When you start importing more than you're producing, then you've got financial troubles. Now you can't pay your bills, because what are you importing? You're importing not only timber now, you're importing gold. So now you can't pay for it because the country's not producing very much. This is what we call a recession. This is when we have financial troubles. You're importing so much, but you're not producing. Something's going wrong, right? So much so that now Shlomo has to give away bits of Eretz Yisrael to pay his bills. I'd say to him, just don't import the gold, right? Don't import the gold, don't give away the cities. Something's smelling bad here, right? To gain a sense of what's happening in the country, right? I'll give you an example. Look at the next section, just a little bit. I put it in taxation. ואת כל ערי המסכנות אשר היו לשלמה, ואת ערי הרכב, ואת ערי הפרשים, ואת חשק שלמה אשר חשק לבנות בירושלים ובלבנון ובכל ארץ מנשתונה. First thing I want to point out, it lists the whole thing. The store cities, the cities of chariots, and the cities of horsemen, and the pleasure buildings of Shlomo. Didn't mention that at the beginning, did it? Those pleasure buildings, right? Shlomo's got into pleasure buildings, whatever those are. And all the people who were left of Emori and the Chiti and the Prizi and the Chevites and the Jebusites who were not of the children of Israel, even their children who were left after them in the land, who the children of Israel were not able to utterly destroy, Shlomo made them into his servants till this day. But the children of Israel, Shlomo didn't make them work for him, but they were men of war and his servants and his princes and his captains and his rulers of his chariots and his horsemen. And there were the chief officers who were over Shlomo's work, 550, etc., etc. First of all, I want you to pay attention. What does Shlomo build here? Arei Miskanot. Who was the last person in the Torah who we remember building Arei Miskanot? Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh builds Arei Miskanot, and of course, who does he enslave? The foreigners. Before, who did we see that Shlomo was getting to do all his work? Bnei Yisrael. He made a tax of Bnei Yisrael. In other words, we were a hard-working nation who were producing. Now, what's he got? As we say, Ovdim Zarim, right? Foreign workers, right? He's got foreign workers working for him because the Israelites, they wouldn't do that. They are his men of war, his servants, his bureaucrats. In other words, we sense that the whole kingdom has gone up in standard of living. Everybody wants a foreign posting in a foreign embassy, and they want to be in charge of the province of Lebanon, or the province of here and there and other. The country isn't producing. The most the country can do is now create pleasure buildings, arei miskanot, right? And suddenly Shlomo is portrayed almost like a pharaoh here, right? Enslaving foreign populations instead of what we saw before, which was the nation shouldering the burden of building the Beit Mikdash. Right? In other words, we've outsourced the project, so to speak. Right? By the way, the Beit Mikdash is built. What else do we need to do? Why do we need so much building? If the temple is already built, this is after 20 years. Okay, there's a certain point where you stop building, right? Where you say, okay, we've reached what we want to do. Now let's get on with, I don't know, the spiritual work we need to do, or simply, maybe actually instead of enslaving other people, going to do all that, what was he meant to do? Tzedek or mishpat. Spread justice around the region. The other thing that we see in these chapters is all the time we see the wealth in the kingdom. If you look here in section 3, Hiram sent in the navy. Remember what Hiram was doing before? What was Hiram doing? Sending wood to build Beit HaMikdash. Now let's see what Hiram is doing. Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen, that had knowledge of the sea with the servants of Schlomo. And they came to Ophir. Ophir, people think, is Africa. And fetched from there gold, 420 talents, and brought it to Shlomo. Right? Once again, what are they bringing? Gold. If you want to look down, just look down the page at verse 22. For the king had sent at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once every 3 years came the navy of Tarshish bringing gold and silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Okay? Now again, really, do we really need these things? You get the sense that suddenly this is where they're interested in exotic birds and ivory. If you look back up to verse 16, let's just read a few lines. King Solomon made 200 targets of big gold. 600 shekels of gold went into one target. He made these, shields in Hebrew. It's a sinah, either a shield or a... And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went into one shield. So what's he going to do with these? Shields going to war. Do you take gold shields into war? They're not very effective. They're too heavy. Gold is a very soft metal. So what can he do with all these shields? He says the king put them in the house in the forest of Lebanon. He hangs them up as a decoration. Again, Bishvil Ma. What's he doing it for? Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory. And he overlaid it with gold. Right? Sounds a little gauche, right? It's a little over the top, right? If it's already ivory, cover it with gold. And there were 6 steps to the throne, and on top of the throne was one round behind. There were arms on either side by the palace of the seat, and 2 lions standing behind the arms, and 12 lions stood on one side and on the other on the 6 steps. And there was not the like made in any kingdom. And I want you to remember, Lo na'aseh kol l'chol ha'mamlachot. There was never anything like it. In our earlier chapters, where do they say there was never anything like it? What were they about? There was never anything like it. What do we say that about? His wisdom. But now, what are they saying? There's never anything like it? Ooh, he's got a really cool throne. Again, what's going on? Look at the next verse, verse 21. All the king Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. None were of silver. It accounted to nothing in the days of Shlomo. Ein kesef, lo nechshav. Right? You gain the sense that everything, it's all about the money. It's all about the wealth, more and more wealth. It's become a means on its own. And I'd say even worse than that. Look at the next section, wisdom. King of Solomon exceeded, this is in the last chapters, King Solomon exceeded all the kings of earth in riches and in wisdom. And all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. And everyone brought his presents, silver, gold, clothes, armor, spices, horses, mules, year by year. Before, why did Solomon have wisdom? He wanted wisdom because to guide this people, to guide them in a good way. Now what's he using his wisdom for? It's a source of revenue. It's a source of wealth. It's a source of riches. And you gain the sense that in order to I guess I'd put it this way, right? You know, you can imagine the story of a poorer family, and there's a man who grew up in poor surroundings, and he says, you know, my father, I never saw my father. He was working in the coal mine. He was working wherever it was. I never had a chance to spend a time with my father. And when I I'm going to make myself into a wealthy man so that when I have children, I'm going to be able to spend time with my children. So he opens a big business and he works and he becomes a wealthy man. And he has children, but then what does he do? He spends every day spending more and more and more and more time in the office. And the business has a life of its own, such that he actually really never sees his children anyway. Because, it's sort of the Frankenstein complex, right? You build this monster, but then the monster has its own life. Or I put it differently. I'll put it in Shlomo terms. Shlomo builds an empire. So the empire should be a platform for the temple. And the temple should be a platform for God. But what happens in the end? The empire starts becoming, in order to sustain that sort of empire, when you build that sort of tool, it starts having a sort of a life of its own. And you can't manage without the gold and silver, or more and more people want them. You need to sustain all of that until it becomes all about that. And somehow somebody lost track of the higher purpose. Somebody lost track of the fact this was meant to actually lead to God, that this was just meant to be a tool for God. You understand what I'm saying? The ultimate thing that happens is Shlomo's wives. And let's take a look here, and I think this will fit into the direction that I've been saying, but also in a very interesting way. This is out of chapter 11, the section I called Sin. King Shlomo loved many foreign women besides the daughter of Pharaoh, women of Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and Chittim. The nations which the Lord had said to the children of Israel, don't mix with them, don't let them come amongst you, for surely they will turn your heart away from God. Shlomo cleaved to these women in love. Okay? So I don't know what it means by the word love. Could he have loved all these women? Because it says in the next verse he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wife turned away his heart. Right? So I don't know what does this word love exactly mean, right? Whether it's some sort of, sexual appetite, or it really is some higher love. Whichever way, to have 1,000 wives, this seems a little crazy. Many people have suggested that these 1,000 wives represent almost sometimes 1,000 alliances, right? The opening verses of the whole chapter talk about Vayitchaten Shlomo et Paro melech Mitzrayim vayikach et bat Paro. In English here it translated, Solomon allied himself by marriage with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he married Pharaoh's daughter. In other words, when you want to make a deal with Egypt, you cement the deal by marrying Pharaoh's daughter. If this represents 1,000 alliances, that might work, because Shlomo was really, the leader of the whole area. But now let's look what happens. It tells us, God told you not to marry into the nations because they will lead you astray. And it says, verse 4, on the bottom of page 6, for those of you who've lost me, for it came to pass when Shlomo was old, his wife turned away his heart to other gods, and his heart was not whole with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. And Shlomo went after Ashtoret, the god of Sidon, and Milcom, the detestation of the Ammonites, the Shikutz Ammonim. And Shlomo did that was evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord as his father, David his father, said. And then Shlomo built a high place for Chemosh in a mount before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the children of Ammon. The Gemara asks the question, did Shlomo really do Avodah Zarah? Did Shlomo really worship idols? And the truth is they bring this from a very interesting point in verse 6. Because it says, Vayash Shlomo hara b'nei Hashem, v'lo milei acharei Hashem k'David aviv. If he was really doing terrible Avodah Zarah, do you say, v'lo milei acharei Hashem k'David aviv? It sounds like he's doing awful things. And they say, well, you know what? He wasn't actually doing the idolatry. Who was? His wives. But his wife said to him, honey, I'd really love it if you'd make me a temple to Chemosh. It would be great if you'd make us a temple to Milcom. And he said, he didn't have the strength to argue. So he said, okay, how much is it? And he wrote out the check, right? And of course then, on the temple, what does it have above the door? The royal crest, right? Right, what do we say? Yud Hey Vav Hey. And then you go inside and there's Chemosh or Milcom. Doesn't look very good. For me, it's not important whether Shlomo personally did Avodah Zarah, that's what it says. Or he paid for it, but I'll say like this. What did Shlomo want to create? Shlomo wanted to create that everybody would come to Jerusalem. They'd come for the wealth, they'd come for the power, they'd come for the knowledge, but they'd come and then they'd see a whole city dedicated to Hashem, dedicated to Tzedek Mishpat. Now people come and visit Jerusalem and they're walking around doing, what do you do when you come to visit a city? You look up on the internet and you see the 10 places to go visit. And they're walking down around and they say, well, what's this nice building? And they say, well, this is an idolatrous temple. Oh, and there's another idolatrous temple. And suddenly, the whole message has become cloudy. The whole message, because if Shlomo's, there's a temple here, but also Kamosh is okay, and Milkom is okay, and Baal is okay, and Hashem is okay, you've just sort of shot yourself in the foot. Shlomo wanted to have appeal to all sorts of other nations, so he made alliances with other nations. But when you open the channels to other kingdoms, how much do you export and how much do you import? When you have a membrane, you want things to be able to go outside, but also you're going to have things inside. If you've got a very strong momentum inside, everything is pushed out. But if the inside is a little bit weak, then other things come in. Shlomo could not sustain the momentum. He built something so large that, as I say, the monster started having a life of its own. The standard of living started overtaking him, and he lost control. He lost control of everything he'd built. The place becomes, the country's producing less, and therefore taxes go up. Shlomo's son becomes king, and the first thing they turn around to him and say, lower the tax rates. And his son, Rechavam, doesn't understand the people. He doesn't understand the people because why? Because he's never experienced a day of poverty in his life. All his advisors have never experienced a day of poverty in his life. And they turn around and they say, basically, sort of, let them eat cake. Right? That's basically what they say. They turn around to them and say, you know what? You're complaining? We're going to make it harder for you. A sense of insensitivity. When I look at Shlomo, well, let's look at two statements from the rabbis, and then we'll sort of try and sum up. We see two Gemarot here, one from Masechet Sanhedrin and one Midrash from Vayikra Rabbah. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, why does the Torah not give us the reason for mitzvot? Because in two verses, reasons were revealed and they caused the greatest person in the world, Shlomo, to stumble. Because it says, don't exceed in wives because they will lead your hearts astray. So says the Torah. Right? The Torah says, Lo yarbe lo nashim pen yasur levavo. What does Shlomo say? He says, I'm wise. I'll have the wise, but they're not going to lead me astray. Right? And again it says he shouldn't have too many horses because it will lead the people back to Egypt and add to his horses. And Shlomo says, don't worry, I'll have a lot of horses, but I won't cause them to go back to Egypt. And yet we read, a chariot came and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver. In other words, Shlomo said, the king has three restrictions. Don't have too much wealth, silver and gold. Don't have too many horses, don't have too many wives. And it says, if you do that, it will lead you astray. Shlomo said, look, I'm very wise. I'll do it, but it won't happen to me. They say, the Gemara continues and says, they say to Shlomo, Al tiech chacham harbe. Don't be too clever. You were too clever for yourself. You didn't listen to the primary words of the Torah which told you about human psychology. One of the most interesting midrashim, I put here at the bottom of the page, from Vayikra Rabbah, one of the oldest midrashim we have. I'll just read this to you. Amazing midrash. Rav Yudan said, all the 7 years of building the temple, Shlomo never drank wine. Now, the Midrash is going to imagine that the day that Shlomo built the temple is the same day that he married the daughter of Pharaoh. Now, I want to say, I don't think that's the pshat. Why don't I think it's the pshat? I'll show you why. Just go back to page 1, and you see verses I didn't read. By the way, these verses are very interesting. The verse I skipped over on page 1. I'll just read the verses with you. Before we even say Shlomo married, loved God, it says, Shlomo allied himself by marriage with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He married Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David to live there until he finished building his palace and the house of the Lord and the walls around Jerusalem. The The people continued to offer sacrifices and open shrines because no house had been built for the name of God. Shlomo loved the Lord and followed the practice of his father David. What's this telling us? Did Shlomo marry the daughter of Pharaoh before the building of the temple or after? Before, right? It also tells us, before it says Shlomo loved God, it says he married the daughter of Pharaoh. In a sort of a deal with Pharaoh. At this point it wasn't dangerous. Right? Later, all those years later, it becomes more dangerous. But the Midrash decides to alter the facts a little bit. I'm back on page 7. And say that the day that Shlomo opened the temple was also the day of his wedding. That might be because he has like 2 lots of 7 days for setting up the temple. And it could be that they think 1 week to celebrate the temple and 1 week for Sheva Brachos, right? Or something like that. Whichever way, this is what it says. All the years of building the temple, Shlomo never drank wine. When he built it and married the daughter of Pharaoh, that night at the wedding, he drank wine for the first time, right? What do we say, right? He was 12 when he became king. So he's like 19, so he had his first time of drinking, right? It didn't go so well. And there were 2 dances. One was 2 parties. One was the celebration of the building of the temple. And the second was the celebration of his marriage to Baparo. Give me a minute. God said, who should I find acceptable, these or those? In other words, God said, where do you want me to go? Which party do you think I should go to? Shlomo's marriage? Or Shlomo? And at that moment he thinks about the possibility of destroying Yerushalayim. But Cholia said, the daughter of Pharaoh danced 80 dances that night. And Shlomo overslept till the 4th hour. The 4th hour is the last moment you can bring the sacrifices in the temple. In other words, the temple's dedicated at night, and he spends the night with Bat Paro, and he oversleeps. But the problem is this. The keys to the temple are under Shlomo's head, and nobody wants to disturb his wedding night. But they've got to bring the korbanot, the korban tamid in the morning. This is the instant the rabbis taught about where the tamid was brought as late as the 4th hour. His mother had to come in to rebuke him. And some say it wasn't his mother, but it was Yeravam. Yeravam, who later rebelled against him, who came in to rebuke him. Now I love the Midrash for its very colourful imagery here, but the Midrash is essentially saying, putting into a wonderful scene, that Shlomo has 2 loves. He loves God and the temple, and he loves Bat Paro. I'll even say more than that. Shlomo loves being his international reputation. He loves the openness to... Now, he's a good religious man, so he loves the international, but he wants to make... I want to be a somebody on the international scene, but the somebody I'm going to be is I'm going to represent God. At a certain point, let's use the metaphor of the Midrash, he drinks too much, right? Whereas the drink of the wedding goes to his head. And he loses this control, he loses his focus, which he had. The years of building the temple, he was focused. He didn't drink. He didn't lose control. Suddenly, with his marriage, he loses control because he has 2 loves pulling on him, and he doesn't know which one to play on. And this is what leads Shlomo astray. Yes?
I'm a fan of you. But in the beginning of your Schiur, I had an impression it's a story of love. Shlomo loves God. The people love Shlomo. Foreign kings love Shlomo. The people even loves paying taxes. The Queen of Sheba even loves Esha Torah. So everything is okay. And something happens in the middle. And my impression is, it's Vaishman Yishurum Veivat.
Okay.
In the middle happens something, and then the decline. But the Midrash seems to me to tell us that the decline started in the beginning.
Okay. I don't even think it's... I'm going to back you 100%. I don't think it's only a Midrash. I think it's the text. I go back to that text on the first page. Before it tells us that Shlomo loves God, it tells us that he married Bat Paro. Now, this is a classic situation where, 90% of the iceberg is under the sea, right? Where you sometimes only realize that then you've got an economic problem once the stock market fell, but it's a process that's been going on already for 10 years, or what have you, if you understand what I mean. In other words, I think the Midrash is trying to say Shlomo was doing everything right at that stage, but there were certain seeds of what he was doing which were already sort of like under the ground fermenting. The weeds didn't come up till later, but it was already happening. And therefore, his marriage of Bat Paro, and certainly she's like a poster girl for this problem because she constantly comes up as a refrain, that I think he disapproves of his marriage to Bat Paro from the start and says, you know what, we told you not to do this. At this stage you were still steering the ship straight, it was still fine, but somewhere in the middle it all became too much, the weight became too intense, and you couldn't hold the steering wheel.
Besides, I understand why Chazal attributed Shirashirim to Shlomo. It's a story of love. Everyone loves everyone. It's the beginning of the story. But it seemed to me to be too idealistic. I can't believe that people really love paying taxes. love slavery.
I hear you. It's a good point, yes.
What does Lalechet Chukot David Aviv mean in that case?
No, so I'm saying, I think he was going to Minyan 3 times a day at the beginning, right? He was, even at the end, maybe he was going to Minyan 3 times a day.
He married Bat Paro, which he shouldn't have married. And 2 psukim later, you say he did the right thing. So
if you want to read it, you can read it like Rashi, right? Who says he converted her, not even in a basketball player's bet din, but in a proper bet din, right? He really converted her. Maybe she was interested. Again, I don't know. He doesn't mention that. It actually mentions. He doesn't say he served the gods of Egypt. It says he served the gods of Ashtoret, the gods of Sidon, and the gods of Ammon. So it wasn't her who was the problem in this particular area, but she becomes the sort of paradigm because his greatest ally is Egypt. I guess what I'm saying in this, yeah.
I don't understand the whole story. Which person in his right mind would put his wedding night on the night of the dedication of the temple, which you waited for 480 years to dedicate it, and this is going to be the goal of what they went out from Egypt.
100%.
And you put your own marriage at the same night.
That's what I was saying. I said when you look at the pshat, there's no doubt in my mind it wasn't the same. It's a midrashic. Midrash frequently plays and telescopes things together, right? It will take certain events and put them all together. There's a famous midrash which says what happened to the Ayil of Abraham. That the Ayil of Abraham, one horn, the shofar was blown at Har Sinai. Another horn will be the horn of Mashiach. The sinews of it was used for David's harp, right? And I can't even remember what else, right? But they're saying that they like sort of taking one object and collapsing things in as a means to sort of say certain things. The same Mizbeach was the Mizbeach of Adam HaRishon, which was the Mizbeach of Noach, which was the Mizbeach in the Beit Mikdash, which was also... Chazal are playing around here. They're saying it was the same night. Now, it wasn't. As we see, he married her before he built the Beit Mikdash. But they're putting it in a literary story, as if to say he's got two things tugging at his heart. We don't know where to dance, right? We don't know which marriage. In other words, to really say, and I'd say more than that. What they're saying is it wasn't just that you had one first and one the other. They're saying that all the time through Shlomo's life, Shlomo had two things which were tugging at him: his more cosmopolitan, open side of him, and his more spiritual side, and that it's very difficult to keep that balance. It's very difficult to keep that balance straight, and that Shlomo eventually couldn't keep that balance. So I want to I think our time is up, so first of all, I think it's, Shlomo is a...
Ultimately, let me ask for a question, which bothers me for quite a few years. and the point is, we still, our picture, our view of Shlomo Melech is still very positive. And we call him Chacham, we call him. Now, if you look at what happened, just the moment he died, his empire collapsed. I mean, how can you call someone Chacham Mikol Adam and he doesn't provide any future, beyond his own life?
I agree with you. I think you're correct. I think it's a question that I have, and I will say that isn't you always want to be careful when we quote things of Chazal. assuming that we've heard once the same Chazal, they just learned Masechet Sanhedrin Perek Achelek in Daf Yomi, and one of these statements there, they talk about 3 kings who didn't have a place in Olam Haba, right? Yerovam and Achav and Menashe. And then the Gemara says, wait a second, why only them 3? I've got another 4th candidate. Who? Shlomo. Because they're not the only ones who did Avodah Zarah. Shlomo, because Yerovam does Avodah Zarah, Achav, and also, they say, what about Shlomo? And there are some people who say, add Shlomo into the Mishnah. In other words, there's certain people who say, not only did Shlomo, very problematic, but he doesn't have a place in the world to come. And I think, by the way, part of the debate about his books, should we include them in Tanakh, or should we not include them in Tanakh? Part of the debate is saying, in the final account, when we look back retrospectively at Shlomo, do we look at it as a positive influence or as a negative influence? Do we see Kohelet as a positive book or a negative, etc., etc.? All that love of Shir HaShirim, did it go in the right direction or not? In the end, in that arm wrestle about Shlomo, and I see where you think Shlomo was in the balance in that regard. In the end, Chazal decided there was more good than bad and decided to keep him in. But it was a decision. It wasn't obvious. And therefore, I think that God gave him wisdom for justice, but he is a very contentious character. It isn't simple with Shlomo. And in the end, in the final decision, you want Chazal Paskid, Shlomo's a kosher character. But you can see he's very problematic. So let me try and sum up. I'll try in case I'm going to say it quickly. First of all, we've seen, I believe that part of learning, if this is in the Tanakh, I'm a very big believer of reading Pshat in Tanakh. Clearly the Tanakh doesn't hide from us some of the more problematic sides of our leaders. Shlomo is an amazing visionary. What he wants to achieve is great. But it also falls down and certainly goes off course. And first of all, even in itself, it's interesting to see our great forebears with their great vision, and that they're people like us, and that they, also have plans which don't always work out in the way they envisioned. I think this also gives me a great amount of humility looking at this story. Sometimes, just like Shlomo, we think we know better. We know better than the Torah. But sometimes our tradition contains a great deal of wisdom. And that sometimes when we have certain laws which say, don't do this because it will lead you in a negative direction, sometimes trust that the law has it right. Because sometimes we think, we'll be able to tread that very fine tightrope, that fine line. We can't always do it. I also think that sometimes it's a fascinating thing to discuss in our own minds, in our own homes, with our own families, in our communities, because we are all people who are in this position as well. We're all committed to Torah, we're all committed to religious lifestyle, to putting God very high up on the priority list in our lives. We're also very exposed to the world, and the exposure to the world sometimes is always a big challenge to us. If on the most simple level, a challenge for our time. How much time am I spending at my desk learning Torah, and how much time am I wasting on the internet, right? Not doing always such useful stuff, right? Even at that very simple level of how I spend my time, and then on other levels as well, which deal more to our religious directions and what have you. And the notion that somebody as powerful as Shlomo, with such a grand vision of Shlomo, was also grappling with the same thing. And that really we all, in some ways, are dancing two dances, right? And the question is, the dance is not a bad, we all want to be exposed to the world. We all need to, but the question is one of filtration, of how to filter, of how to keep our course, and how to keep our focus. All of this is a challenge for us, as it was for Shlomo. Maybe that's exactly why we have the opportunity to read his works and to read what he has. He was an amazing, when I read Shir HaShirim, you feel the spiritual power of Shir HaShirim amazingly, right? And it's amazing to think that somebody with the spiritual power of Shir HaShirim should have suffered from these dilemmas. It gives us a sense that even the greatest people also have to watch themselves as well, right? So, this is what I wanted to share with you. When I look back on what I've done over the 3 shiurim, and I didn't quite plan it this way, we've spoken a lot about complicated stories in Tanakh. and about stories where we can look at idealized people, whether it was the other night, Yaakov and his sons, Shimon, Levi, and his other sons. Today also looking at Esav, Yaakov, and today looking at Shlomo. Many people we sometimes idealize, and what I've ended up doing in all of my shiurim is really trying to look at them in a more down-to-earth perspective. And I've also spoken about how everybody has a biography. Everybody, we don't just have a static image, Shlomo, the wisest of all people, and then he ends. Everybody has a biography. And Baruch Hashem, we have long lives. That means we have long lives in order to lose focus. We also have long lives in order to improve things that we've done wrong. We have long lives to learn from our mistakes, please God. And the Torah and the Tanakh is really telling us these stories so that we can learn from the wisdom of the Tanakh and hopefully apply some of the messages in the lives of ourselves and in the lives of our community. So I just wanted to say thank you very, very much to you all. It's really been a pleasure to meet you all, and I've really enjoyed learning Torah, and thank you to the whole community. Shabbat.